The toasted bread was still on the plate when Ethan Parker vanished in Hutchinson, Kansas, a town with a population of over 40,000. The morning of March 12, 2009, began with clear skies and a gentle spring breeze blowing through the wheat fields surrounding the town. At 7:30 a.m., Ethan, 15 years old, left the red brick house on Plum Street with his backpack slung over his shoulder. By 7:45 a.m., Dorothy, a neighbor, waved through her window as she saw him pass by the road leading to Carey Park. But by 8:15 a.m., when the teacher took attendance at Hutchinson High, Ethan's seat was empty. What happened in those less than 45 minutes would haunt Hutchinson for years to come. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the morning of March 12, 2009, Hutchinson, Kansas, began what seemed like another peaceful day. The small streets lined with red brick houses stood close together, the early spring air still carrying a chill, with thin wisps of fog hovering over the pavement. The fields on the town's outskirts were still dewy, while downtown, early opening coffee shops wafted the scent of freshly roasted coffee. Ethan Parker, 15, son of Michael and Karen Parker, woke up as usual, ate a quick breakfast of a slice of toast and a glass of milk, and got ready for school. He slung on his worn green backpack, used for 2 years, wore a light gray hoodie, dark blue jeans, and slightly worn sneakers. It was a familiar outfit, nothing unusual, giving no hint of anything out of the ordinary. Ethan left home at 7:30 a.m., walking as usual to Hutchinson High, just a 15-minute walk from home. His father saw him step out the door, earphones in, walking briskly but calmly. About 15 minutes later, around 7:45 a.m., Dorothy, the elderly neighbor sitting on her porch, reading the morning paper, saw Ethan pass by, his backpack swaying on his back, earphones still in, face lowered, eyes seemingly focused on the road ahead. That was the last time anyone saw Ethan present in the town. At 8:15 a.m., when the bell rang for class at Hutchinson High, the teacher noticed Ethan was absent. Initially, the teacher assumed he was simply skipping without reason, but minutes later, when they called home, Ethan's mother confirmed he had left on time as usual. Unease began to creep in. Karen called her husband, and they hurriedly walked the route from home to school, but there was no sign of their son. He wasn't at the basketball court or the corner store. Everything seemed to vanish within a few blocks. By noon, when Ethan still hadn't returned, the Parker family's fear turned to real panic, forcing them to call the Hutchinson police. The question of how a teenager could disappear in broad daylight on a familiar route quickly became a heavy burden on local authorities. That same noon, Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, a seasoned officer experienced in missing persons cases, and young officer Ryan Cooper were dispatched to the red brick house on Plum Street. Karen Parker opened the door, her eyes red, still clutching the phone she'd used to call Ethan's number repeatedly, only to hear endless ringing. On the dining table, the glass of milk had gone cold, and the half-eaten toast from breakfast remained, as if time had frozen since Ethan left. Michael Parker paced back and forth, recounting details in a hoarse voice. His son left at 7:30 a.m., wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, white sneakers, and carrying an old green backpack. He emphasized that Ethan had no money, no extra clothes or personal items, and had never shown any intent to run away. Reynolds requested to check Ethan's bedroom. The bed was still unmade, clothes neatly folded in the closet, and an unfinished homework notebook lay on the desk. The desktop computer was still on, its browser history stopped at a science document. There were no signs Ethan had planned to leave long-term. Karen insisted Ethan was a responsible kid, with no major family conflicts or history of skipping school. These details were enough for Reynolds to bypass the 24-hour waiting rule, and he immediately called the station to open a missing juvenile case. Ethan's full description, appearance, clothing, and identifying features was entered into the NCIC system for nationwide access. Meanwhile, another group of officers fanned out across the neighborhood. Dorothy, the neighbor who saw Ethan at 7:45 a.m., confirmed it was definitely him, walking normally, earphones in, backpack on. A man from the next street said he briefly saw a teenager standing at a corner while driving to work, but wasn't sure it was Ethan. All this was noted, but nothing was concrete enough to be a lead. At Hutchinson High, Ethan's homeroom teacher confirmed he wasn't present from the first period and hadn't reported an absence. Classmates said no one saw him on campus that morning. This confirmed Ethan vanished before reaching school, within a mere few blocks. That afternoon, police set up a temporary command post in the Parkers' neighborhood. Ethan's photos, hastily printed from his school record and a recent basketball game, were posted on utility poles, storefronts, and bus stops within a 1-mile radius. Local radio station KSN broadcast continuous alerts, reading out his description and a hotline number. Volunteers, many of whom knew Ethan, began searching alleys and parks, calling his name. Hutchinson's peaceful atmosphere was suddenly replaced by tension, as people eyed each other with suspicion. Late that afternoon, Reynolds returned to the Parker home for more information. He asked about close friends, recent activities, and any changes in Ethan's behavior. Michael reiterated that his son had never been in trouble, was preparing for a math test and a school basketball tournament. Karen added that the night before, Ethan had been chatting happily, showing no signs of distress or impulsiveness. These answers made the runaway theory less plausible. Reynolds took a photo of Ethan in his basketball uniform, smiling under the gym lights, then nodded to the family, promising they'd do everything to find their son. As night fell, the Parker home sank into silence. Karen sat dazed by the phone, hoping any call would bring news of Ethan. Michael paced like a caged animal, while outside, loudspeakers repeated calls for community help. In the report sent to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation that night, Reynolds wrote a critical line, "Low likelihood of voluntary departure. Signs point to external interference, to be treated as a serious missing persons case." That line marked a turning point. From a seemingly harmless disappearance, Ethan Parker's case became a full-scale investigation. For all of Hutchinson, it dawned that this wasn't a teenage prank, but the start of a chilling mystery. When the case was officially entered into NCIC, the search for Ethan Parker launched on the first day with unprecedented scale for a missing person case in Hutchinson. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds took direct command, knowing the first hours were critical in teen cases. The Hutchinson police mobilized all available personnel, with support from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. A mobile command unit was set up at the Plum Street intersection, where Ethan left home that morning. A large map was spread out, marking the familiar route from the Parker home to Hutchinson High, with key areas to search: the park along the route, Carey Lake on the town's edge, and a truck stop near the highway. About 40 officers were split into small teams, joined by nearly 100 local volunteers, residents, classmates, and school parents. Police dogs were brought in, sniffing a spare hoodie from Ethan's closet. The usually quiet Hutchinson streets were filled with searchers' footsteps. From Plum Street to the school's gate, every bush and alley was combed. Carey Park, a common shortcut for students, became a focal point. Officers scoured the grass, probed bushes with sticks, and waded into the muddy lake shore. Local divers were even called to check Carey Lake's waters, though the chance of Ethan falling in was slim. Overhead, a police helicopter swept the outskirts, its infrared camera scanning for bodies or unusual objects in the fields. The truck stop to the west, frequented by big rigs, was thoroughly searched. Locked containers were opened, and empty warehouses were lit up with flashlights. But after hours, the results were zero. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no fabric linked to Ethan. That afternoon, the search expanded 3 miles, covering less traveled roads. Loudspeakers urged residents to check backyards, sheds, and garages. A few hotline calls came in. Someone reported a green van driving slowly near the school. Another claimed to hear a distant scream that morning. Police noted these, but couldn't verify their accuracy. Reynolds ordered techs to build a detailed timeline. Ethan left home at 7:30. Dorothy saw him at 7:45, and he was absent by 8:15. The disappearance window was under 30 minutes. Too short, yet too long for anything to happen, Reynolds sighed. Meanwhile, the dogs tracked around Carey Park, but lost the scent near an intersection leading to the outskirts, suggesting Ethan might have been taken in a vehicle. The truck stop team reported no suspicious signs, and questioned drivers denied seeing a matching teen. As night fell, helicopter floodlights and flashlights still swept the empty roads. The Parkers sat in the police's field tent, silently staring at a map dotted with red marks. Karen sobbed each time a team returned empty-handed, while Michael clenched his fists, as if wanting to smash the command table. Reynolds kept his voice calm, but his eyes showed growing strain. "We've covered the entire route, searched the park, lake, and warehouses, but the boys vanished into thin air." By midnight, the search paused for teams to rest and prepare for the next day. The internal report noted, Day 1, no physical evidence, no signs of violence. Voluntary departure still considered, but external interference more likely. Hutchinson grew quieter than ever, but fear began to spread. If a teen could vanish on his way to school, what might happen to other kids tomorrow? The next morning, as teams resumed searching the route, from Plum Street to Hutchinson High, a volunteer reported to the command post that he'd found a backpack in the grass near the woods by the south loop of Carey Park. Police immediately sealed the area and called in forensics. The black backpack, a common style, wasn't the green one Ethan's family described. Inside were no books or personal items, just neatly cut stacks of white paper. This oddity baffled everyone. Was the backpack placed to mislead, or was it unrelated? Forensics quickly took fingerprints, collected fibers, and tested for DNA, but initial results showed no match to Ethan. Reynolds noted, "Unidentified item, high chance of being a diversion." Still, it was kept as evidence, as any anomaly could lead to a breakthrough in missing persons cases. Meanwhile, the hotline received a call from a woman living near Hutchinson High. She claimed that between 7:40 and 7:50 a.m. on the day Ethan vanished, she saw a dark green van driving slowly near the school's gate. The van looked old, with tinted windows. She remembered it clearly because its speed seemed suspicious, like it was scoping the area. Police brought her to the station for a formal statement and description. From this, a sketch artist drew a middle-aged man with short hair in the driver's seat. But when the sketch was shown to the community, no one recognized or confirmed it. The promising lead quickly stalled. In the following days, investigators noticed an unexplainable gap in the timeline. From Ethan leaving home at 7:30 to Dorothy seeing him at 7:45, everything aligned. But from then until 8:15, when the teacher noted his absence, was a 30-minute void no one could account for. The route to school took only 15 minutes, yet Ethan never reached campus. Those missing 20 minutes became the case's crux. Reynolds noted, 20 minutes is enough for a vehicle to stop, abduct, and leave unnoticed. Police scoured all cameras within a mile of the school. But in 2009, Hutchinson's surveillance was sparse, mostly low-resolution store cameras, often faulty. Some footage was lost due to bad hard drives. Police found a few blurry frames of a dark vehicle passing, but couldn't identify the plate or driver. It might have been the van the witness saw, or just a coincidence. Combining witness statements, the odd backpack and timeline data, the picture was contradictory. No signs of a struggle were found on the route. No blood, no witnesses saw Ethan forced into a vehicle. But there were no signs he left voluntarily either. Police questioned classmates, who said Ethan seemed normal that morning, mentioning no unusual plans. A teacher recalled Ethan talking about submitting a science assignment that day, suggesting he intended to attend class. Reynolds and his team knew the current clues were both vital and fragile. The paper-filled backpack could be a cruel prank. The green van might belong to someone unrelated, and the 20-minute gap might hold the answer they hadn't found. At the command post, Hutchinson's map was covered in red pins, each marking a statement or searched location. Reynolds ordered a minute-by-minute timeline. 7:30 Ethan left home. 7:45. Dorothy saw him. 7:50. A man driving to work saw a teen at a corner. 7:55. 8:15. No further reports. Every theory led to the same gap. What worried Reynolds most was that, if this was a planned abduction, the perpetrator might have studied Ethan's routine, chosen a low-traffic route, and exploited that critical window to act. That day's internal meeting ended in heavy silence. Hutchinson police had initial clues, but all were vague, lacking the weight for a real breakthrough. In the report to KBI, Reynolds wrote succinctly, "Unusual backpack, green van sighting, unconfirmed sketch, and a 20-minute gap. All suggest external interference, but concrete evidence remains elusive." The biggest question lingered, in those brief 20 minutes, what really happened to Ethan Parker. 2 weeks after Ethan's disappearance, the initial intense search efforts began to stall. Day and night searches around Carey Park, the lake, the truck stop, and even extended to fields and outskirts, yielded nothing. The paper-filled backpack was sent to KBI's lab for detailed analysis, but fingerprint and DNA tests were negative. The green van lead didn't progress. The suspect sketch remained unidentified, and blurry camera footage was inconclusive. Reynolds admitted in the department's final report, no physical evidence, no direct witnesses, no piece strong enough to form a complete picture. After nearly 2 weeks of all-out effort, Hutchinson's team handed the case to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation for state-level handling. KBI investigators reviewed the timeline, cross-checked statements, and compared the case to other missing persons files in the state. They concluded it was likely a targeted abduction, but without witnesses seeing Ethan forced, it remained a hypothesis. Some suggested Ethan might have known his abductor, explaining the lack of struggle. Yet no one in his circle, friends, family, or teachers, could point to anyone suspicious. All of Ethan's connections seemed normal. Through spring and summer 2009, Ethan Parker's case was Hutchinson's focus. Local media covered it heavily, with his photo on front pages. But as time passed, news frequency dwindled. Townsfolk resumed daily life, while the Parkers were drained by stress. Karen barely went to work, spending most of her time by the phone. Michael tried staying calm, but sleepless nights left him gaunt. They attended every community meeting and poster campaign, but hope faded. In late fall, KBI held a press conference, admitting no new evidence had emerged. A reporter asked bluntly, "Do you consider this an abduction or a runaway case?" The lead investigator replied, "We lean toward abduction, but so far, we lack concrete evidence to confirm." The cautious answer crushed many hopes. By December 2009, 9 months after Ethan vanished, the case was classified as a cold case. This meant no dedicated task force, just a few investigators periodically reviewing new leads. For the Parkers, this felt like a sentence. They faced a cruel truth: their son might never return, or if he did, only in case files. Hutchinson grew accustomed to Ethan's absence. Posters on poles weathered and tore. Hutchinson High started the new school year without Ethan's name on the roster. His friends mentioned him less and less. Everything seemed to gather dust. Meanwhile, Karen and Michael lived in a spiral of despair. Karen kept opening Ethan's bedroom window each morning, letting light in as if he might walk through. Michael tried to stay composed but often snapped, leading to endless arguments. The family began to fracture under the weight of grief. KBI's 2009 summary report stated briefly, Case #09214E Ethan Parker, missing juvenile, Hutchinson, Reno County. Status: cold. Those cold words closed the case's first phase. For everyone involved, especially Ethan's parents, cold case was a cutting wound, forcing them to live with an unsolved void as a teenager vanished in broad daylight without a trace. After Ethan Parker's case was officially labeled a cold case in late 2009, Kansas Bureau of Investigation investigators continued key procedural steps, including entering the Parker family's DNA into the National CODIS database, Combined DNA Index System. This was seen as a final measure to keep the case, though dormant, linked to potential future resolution. One morning in early January 2010, Michael, Karen, and their younger daughter Emily, 12, were called to KBI's Topeka office. The atmosphere in the DNA collection room was both unfamiliar and tense. They each extended a hand as a technician gently swabbed the inside of their cheeks with sterile cotton. The process unfolded in silence, broken only by the technician's pen scratches and Karen's quick breaths. As each sample was sealed in numbered tubes, Michael asked hoarsely, "Will this help us at all?" The technician explained that the samples would be entered into CODIS, a federal DNA database enabling automatic cross-matching with millions of unidentified profiles across the U.S. CODIS not only stores DNA from convicted criminals, but also includes tens of thousands of profiles from unidentified remains, crime scene samples, and other missing persons cases. The significance of this is immense. If anywhere, at any time, investigators find an unidentified body, a bone fragment, or even a biological trace matching Ethan's or his family's DNA, the system will immediately alert. Thus, even though the case has gone cold, the door of hope remains slightly ajar. Reynolds, who still kept in touch with the Parker family, explained, "CODIS is like a network connecting every scattered piece across the country. If Ethan is still out there somewhere, or if a trace of him shows up, the system will find it." In the early months of 2010, the KBI lab officially completed the process and uploaded the Parker family's DNA samples into the system. An automated notification confirmed that the Parker family reference samples were now in CODIS. From then on, any DNA sample collected from crime scenes nationwide would be compared. Initially, hope surged in Michael and Karen's hearts. They thought it might only take weeks or months for a match to be reported, bringing answers. But as time passed, investigators' computer screens kept displaying the familiar message, "No match found." The year 2010 passed without hope. In 2011, a few bone samples found in Nebraska were sent for comparison, but the results were negative. In 2012, Colorado police reported an unidentified teenage body found in a canyon, but DNA testing didn't match Ethan. Each time, the Parker family's hope was reignited only to plummet into despair. Emily, Ethan's younger sister, often asked her parents, "If there's no match, does that mean he's still alive?" Karen could only hold her daughter, unable to answer. KBI investigators, in their quarterly reports, noted ongoing CODIS checks. They explained that the database was constantly expanding. Each year, hundreds of thousands of new samples were added, from both criminal cases and missing persons. CODIS was like a vast archive, but this also meant waiting for a match could take years, even decades. For the Parker family, it was a double-edged sword. Hope never fully died, but neither did it bring answers. By 2014, nearly 5 years after the case went cold, KBI's summary report still read DNA reference samples uploaded to CODIS. No matches to date. For Reynolds, who had retired from the Hutchinson police but still followed the case, this was a lifelong obsession. He once said, in a brief interview with a local paper, "We did everything we could in the early days. CODIS is the last hope, but so far, it's been silent." Silence. That was the state enveloping Hutchinson for years to come. No calls with news, no identified bodies, no new leads. Ethan's posters faded, torn by rain and wind. Hutchinson High welcomed new classes, and Ethan Parker's name became a faint memory to a few old friends. But for Michael, Karen, and Emily, every CODIS update brought breathless anticipation. And each time, they received the same answer: no match. CODIS. Time marched on, from 2015 to 2016, and the case sank into complete silence. The media stopped reporting, local police stopped mentioning it, and only the CODIS file remained, a reminder that somewhere, Ethan's mystery awaited resolution. For the Parker family, CODIS was a fragile thread tying them to hope, growing thinner and more tenuous with each passing year. In the years following the upload of the Parker family's DNA to CODIS with no results, KBI and Hutchinson police didn't entirely give up. They conducted multiple suspect reviews based on local intelligence and reports of crimes involving minors. A prominent lead in 2011 was Carl Jennings, a long-haul truck driver who frequently stopped at the truck stop west of Hutchinson, searched on the first day of Ethan's disappearance. Carl had an unusual travel history, often appearing in small towns and leaving at night. Police brought him in for questioning, searched his truck and a rented warehouse in Newton. Initially, Carl's record raised red flags: 2 prior convictions for petty theft and a drop charge for allegedly luring a minor in Missouri. But after 3 days of questioning, reviewing dashcam footage, checking his work schedule, and testing DNA from items found, nothing linked to Ethan. Carl had a solid alibi for the morning of March 12, 2009. He was picking up a shipment over 100 miles from Hutchinson. Though cleared, his name remained in the file as an unresolved question mark. In 2012, an anonymous tip suggested a former Parker neighbor, Harold Whitman, 46, might be involved. Harold, who once lived 3 houses away, had a troubling past, arrested in 1994 for child abduction, but released for lack of evidence. Police records showed he often wandered the neighborhood, watching kids go to school. KBI couldn't ignore the tip. They obtained a warrant to search Harold's Wichita home, seizing his computer, phone, hundreds of CDs, and personal journals. Forensic analysis of the contents disappointed everyone. Nothing indicated Harold interacted with or mentioned Ethan. His DNA, tested against fibers from the paper-filled backpack found near Carey Park, didn't match. Crucially, Harold wasn't in Hutchinson when Ethan vanished. Work records proved he was in another town. Though his history alarmed the Parkers, the investigation hit another dead end. KBI also checked 3 suspicious locations from intelligence reports: an abandoned house on the town's edge, an empty garage where kids reported seeing strange lights, and a rented apartment in Hutchinson once occupied by a drifter. At each site, police used dogs and biological trace detectors. All results were negative: no blood, no physical evidence, nothing tied to Ethan. Repeatedly dashed hopes left the team increasingly exhausted. The Parkers, following each investigation, swung between hope and despair. Karen told a local reporter, "Every time they call, I think they've found something. But it always comes back to nothing. It's like my son vanished into thin air." Michael grew quieter, his face etched with strain. Emily, growing up in the family's silence, learned to stop asking, knowing the answer was always nothing new. For KBI, Ethan Parker's case became a textbook stalemate. Every logical avenue was tried. Suspects with records, neighborhood acquaintances, community tips, all stopped at insufficient evidence. The 2013 summary report read, "No viable suspects identified. All leads exhausted. Unless new evidence or a breakthrough emerged, the case would remain frozen." From 2014 onward, the case grew colder. Media rarely mentioned it, and the community began to see it as an unresolved wound. KO continued running, but each update added only "no match found." Reynolds, now retired, once told a former colleague, "We knocked on every door we could, but all we found was darkness." As he said, the case, despite helicopters, dogs, and KBI and FBI support, didn't advance a single step in years. 7 years after Ethan Parker vanished, his case remained dormant in KBI's cold case files, occasionally reviewed during routine checks. The Parkers were nearly hopeless, and Hutchinson saw it as an old scar. But in June 2016, over 200 miles away in bustling Oklahoma City, a seemingly minor event opened a new path. An air conditioning repair company hiring young workers required applicants to submit a driver's license, birth certificate, or social security number for background checks. Among them was a 22-year-old named Daniel Cooper. He filled out personal details, listing his birth as April 1994 and an address at a modest suburban Oklahoma City rental. But when asked for a birth certificate or social security number, Daniel couldn't provide them. He explained he lost his documents as a child and never had them reissued. The HR manager, Rachel Morgan, initially thought it was simple negligence, but when Daniel insisted he'd never had a social security number, she grew suspicious. In her years of hiring, she'd never met an adult American without valid ID. Rachel reported the issue to the Oklahoma Labor Department. Daniel's file was forwarded to their verification unit, and the serious lack of documentation raised red flags. They notified Oklahoma City Police to clarify his identity. A task force was quickly formed to approach the young man. Daniel was invited to the station under the pretext of assisting with identity verification for his job application. In the initial interview, Daniel seemed nervous but cooperative. He said he lived with a woman named Susan Whitaker, whom he called his mother, since 2009. When asked about his childhood, he recalled only vague, fragmented memories, mostly from Wichita, Kansas, before moving to Oklahoma. He insisted he'd never traveled beyond those two states. Police found his statements odd, especially his inability to recall where he attended elementary school or who enrolled him. Such memory gaps were unusual for an adult. After the interview, police requested a voluntary DNA sample to aid identity verification. A sterile swab was gently swept inside his cheek and sealed in a tube. The process was quick, but it marked a pivotal moment in Ethan Parker's case. When Daniel Cooper's DNA was entered into CODIS, the process followed a familiar automated routine. The cheek swab data was digitized and uploaded to the server, which scanned against millions of stored profiles. Within hours, a red alert flashed on the screen at the Quantico, Virginia data center. Match found. Parker family reference samples. The match was 99.99%, nearly absolute, confirming Daniel Cooper was Ethan Parker, the teen who vanished from Hutchinson, Kansas in March 2009. Technicians were stunned, knowing this was a 7-year cold case thought unsolvable. The information was immediately sent to KBI with top priority. Investigator James Holloway, handling cold cases in Topeka, recalled it as one of the most emotional moments of his career when he read Match Priority. Ethan Parker case #09214E. He promptly called Hutchinson's unit, ordering the case file reopened. "We found him. Ethan Parker is alive," Holloway said curtly over the phone. Within hours, a flurry of actions began. The 2009 case file was pulled from storage. Search reports, witness statements, and scene maps spread across the meeting table. In Oklahoma City, local police, KBI, and FBI coordinated to cross-check the DNA again, to eliminate any error. An independent lab was tasked with retesting. The result confirmed a 99.99% match. This was no longer speculation, but undeniable scientific fact. Daniel Cooper was Ethan Parker. The news sent shockwaves through the investigative team. After 7 years, a case thought forgotten roared back to life. The DNA confirmation wasn't just a technical breakthrough, but carried profound legal and emotional weight. Legally, it proved Ethan never ran away, but lived under a false identity. Emotionally, it reignited hope for the Parkers, though they hadn't yet been officially informed. Police knew that moment was near. Holloway wrote in his KBI report, "This is the biggest break in the case since day one. The file must be reopened immediately, with all resources mobilized to verify Ethan's living circumstances and the person hiding him all this time." That week, an emergency meeting was held at KBI's Topeka office, attended by FBI, Hutchinson Police, and federal prosecutors. On a large screen, they reviewed the 2009 timeline. 7:30 a.m., Ethan left home. 7:45 a.m. Dorothy saw him. 8:15 a.m., he wasn't at school. The old map, dotted with red pins, sat beside the new DNA report. The team concluded, "We not only have a living victim but a suspect who raised him as Daniel Cooper. That suspect, per initial records, was Susan Whitaker, the woman listed as Daniel's guardian in his 2010 school enrollment." Reopening the case after 7 years meant Hutchinson's community would soon hear shocking news. But first, The priority was keeping the information confidential to protect Ethan and build evidence to prosecute Susan. Investigative teams were assigned. One reviewed 2009 physical evidence, including the paper-filled backpack, green van reports, and suspect sketch. Another monitored Susan Whitaker in Oklahoma, gathering financial and community data. A forensic team continued mining CODIS for any new related samples. Amid this, the Parkers lived in weary routine, unaware a door was opening. Emily, now 19 and preparing for college, avoided mentioning her brother to spare her mother's tears. Michael worked quietly, while Karen lived reclusively in the house. Ethan left 7 years earlier. They had no idea that within days, police would deliver life-changing news. As the case was officially reopened, Hutchinson's lead investigator wrote, "After 7 years of silence, Ethan Parker's case is reborn. DNA evidence ends all runaway theories. This is a meticulously hidden abduction, and now we must uncover the truth." In the dim halls of the police station, dusty files were reopened, and long-dormant questions returned with unprecedented weight. It was only the beginning, and this time, no one in the team wanted the case to slip back into darkness. After the DNA confirmed and Ethan Parker's case was reopened, the federal task force's first step was a thorough background check on Daniel Cooper. If Daniel was indeed Ethan, how was this new identity created, and who orchestrated the paperwork? The team sent to Oklahoma City began by reviewing Daniel's school records. Northwest High School's data showed Daniel enrolled in fall 2010, just over a year after Ethan vanished. His file included a birth certificate for Daniel Cooper, born April 1994 in Wichita, Kansas, signed by guardian Susan Whitaker. Investigator Holloway immediately noted the suspicious coincidence. Wichita was less than an hour's drive from Hutchinson. A forensic document team analyzed the birth certificate, finding the paper didn't match Kansas's 1994 official birth certificate stock, and the embossed seal was faint, likely hand-stamped. The ink on Susan Whitaker's signature didn't match the rest, indicating multiple alterations. Concurrently, investigators contacted the Kansas Department of Health to check Wichita hospital birth records for April 1994. Results confirmed Susan Whitaker had no record of giving birth then or from 1990 to 2000, proving the Daniel Cooper birth certificate was fake. From one fabricated document, Susan had built an entire new life for Ethan, allowing him to attend school and live normally, without raising serious questions for years. Digging deeper, the team uncovered systematic deception. Daniel's vaccination record was a sloppy copy, with handwritten entries not matching any Wichita nurse's script. The record lacked vaccine lot numbers, mandatory for medical files. This reinforced that Susan faked Daniel's entire medical history to legitimize his existence. Northwest High School confirmed the submitted records seemed valid, and they lacked tools to verify authenticity. Susan, as guardian, appeared devoted, paying tuition on time and attending parent meetings, raising no suspicions. KBI reviewed Susan's financial and residency records. From 2009 to 2010, she abruptly moved from Hutchinson to Wichita, renting a small South Side apartment. Around then, Daniel Cooper appeared as if from nowhere. Bank checks showed all transactions in cash, no loans or large transfers. This was typical of someone avoiding system oversight. The team's report read, fake birth certificate, invalid medical records, irregular financial evidence. All point to one scenario: Susan Whitaker created a new identity for Ethan Parker after abducting him in 2009. Terrifyingly, for 7 years, the administrative system never flagged this irregularity. To strengthen evidence, the FBI conducted an in-depth birth certificate analysis. The embossed seal was from an online purchase stamp seen in early 2000s fraud cases. The ink's chemical composition didn't match Kansas's 1994 standard, undeniable proof of forgery. When investigators interviewed Susan's Wichita neighbors, the picture clarified. A woman across the street said Susan introduced Daniel in 2010 as a distant nephew living with her. She never mentioned giving birth, only that Daniel was an orphaned cousin's child. The neighbor believed her, as Susan seemed genuinely caring. Another neighbor, an elderly man who fixed Susan's fence, recalled Daniel as a quiet, reserved boy, unfriendly with strangers. When asked about his parents, Susan said curtly, "He has no one else, I'm his only family." These accounts showed Susan crafted a seamless story to legitimize Ethan's presence as Daniel. Financial investigation revealed Susan's calculated approach. From 2010, she nearly stopped bank transactions. Her clinic wages were withdrawn in cash immediately, and all expenses, tuition, utilities, even rent, were paid in cash or money orders. Her clear goal: leave minimal electronic traces. Investigators noted this was systematic concealment, not coincidence. An ordinary nurse had no reason to avoid banks so thoroughly unless hiding a secret. When investigators interviewed more acquaintances from Susan's church, they saw the sophistication of her cover. Everyone recalled Susan regularly bringing Daniel to Sunday services, sitting side by side, looking no different from a biological mother and son. No one suspected anything, even praising Daniel for being polite and well-behaved. Once, when the pastor asked about the boy's parents, Susan replied tearfully that Daniel lost them young, and she took him in to spare him from an orphanage. The touching story made the church community even more sympathetic and protective of them. It was a perfect facade for a kidnapping hidden for 7 years. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized Susan's meticulous preparation. She never took Daniel to large hospitals, only visiting small clinics where she had connections to obtain handwritten documents. All of Daniel's personal information was tightly controlled. He wasn't allowed to join activities requiring official paperwork, like federal summer camps or state-level sports competitions. When Daniel was old enough for a driver's license, Susan deflected, citing lost documents. Ethan's entire life as Daniel was confined to a small circle, Susan created, enough for him to exist, but not enough for the legal system to notice. KBI's interim report concluded, Susan Whitaker built a systematic cover, a fake birth certificate, forged medical records, a distant nephew's story to explain to the community, and cash payments to avoid bank traces. This was a plan sustained diligently for 7 years, allowing the victim to live under a false identity without detection. These details reinforced the suspicion that Ethan Parker's disappearance was not random, but the result of a meticulously planned abduction. Susan Whitaker, once trusted by Wichita's community, now appeared to investigators as someone who stole a teenager's childhood and crafted a clever veil to deceive everyone. As the picture of Susan Whitaker became clearer, investigators knew the next step: gather irrefutable physical evidence. Based on the fake birth certificate and surveillance data, federal prosecutors obtained a comprehensive search warrant for the home where Susan and Daniel Cooper lived in suburban Oklahoma City. One foggy morning in early November 2016, police cars and a forensic team quietly surrounded the modest single-story red brick apartment. Susan was asked to leave the premises as the team began searching each room. Tension hung in the air. Everyone understood that finding forged documents would be the pivotal piece turning suspicion into undeniable reality. In a drawer of a small desk in the bedroom, investigators found a large envelope containing various documents. Inside was the original Daniel Cooper birth certificate, an old Social Security card with an invalid serial number, and a vaccination booklet with handwritten pages. All showed signs of forgery. The birth certificate bore the faint hand-stamped seal experts had identified as fake. The Social Security card was printed on thin paper, lacking security features. The vaccination booklet had no vaccine lot numbers, inconsistent ink, and erasure marks. These items were carefully sealed, with time and location of seizure documented to ensure legal validity in court. More crucially, in Susan's workspace, the team seized a Dell laptop. The digital forensics team extracted data. In the documents folder, they found a scanned Daniel Cooper birth certificate and multiple drafts showing Photoshop edits. File metadata revealed creation in August 2010. coinciding with Susan enrolling Ethan in school. Other files labeled birth_cert_final or vaccination_form 2 showed Susan's effort in crafting documents. This was critical, electronic evidence of intentional forgery. Upon closer analysis, forensic printing experts compared the ink and paper of the seized documents to Kansas state standards. The paper used for the fake birth certificate was mass-produced in 2010, not existing in 1994, when Daniel was supposedly born. The laser ink's chemical composition matched commercial inks sold widely from 2008-2011, not Kansas's proprietary ink. This became strong forensic evidence proving the birth certificate wasn't legitimate. The search team also found supporting details, receipts from a local print shop showing Susan printed small batches of documents in 2010. Matching the scan file metadata. A USB hidden in an old flower vase contained an incomplete fake passport draft. Investigators suspected Susan was preparing to move Ethan out of Oklahoma. All evidence was seized, sealed, and cataloged. After nearly 8 hours of searching, the evidence room table was laden with items: fake birth certificate, forged Social Security card, fake vaccination booklet, laptop, USB, and printing receipts. Technicians meticulously documented, photographed each item, and verified seal numbers. KBI's internal report noted, search of suspect Susan Whitaker's residence, Tautoklasa 16, seized forged documents and electronic evidence, proving the creation of a false identity for Ethan Parker under the name Daniel Cooper. Evidence is substantial enough to support charges of kidnapping and document fraud. Federal prosecutors then began building the case. Each piece of evidence was categorized, coded, and paired with forensic reports. Experts were assigned as technical witnesses for trial, one to prove the fake birth certificate, another to explain computer data, and a third to analyze ink and paper chemistry. The goal was clear: create an unbreakable chain of evidence, from physical to electronic, from financial to community testimony. The collection of physical evidence marked a turning point. Where the case once relied on DNA and suspicion, the legal system now had tangible items proving criminal acts. Susan Whitaker was no longer the kindly nurse in the community's eyes, but someone who actively created a false identity and raised Ethan as Daniel Cooper for 7 years. With the seized evidence, investigators believed it was time to move from investigation to prosecution. When the final report was completed, lead investigator Holloway concluded, the Ethan Parker case has gone from hopeless silence to concrete physical evidence. We are no longer searching for the truth. We hold it in our hands. After the evidence-heavy search, Susan Whitaker was officially brought to an interrogation room at Oklahoma City Police Headquarters. It was a small room with gray walls, dim white neon light, and a cold metal table. Facing her were 2 federal investigators, while behind a one-way mirror, prosecutors and KBI agents watched silently. When asked to explain, Susan remained calmer than expected. She insisted Daniel Ethan was a distant nephew she informally adopted after his parents died. I just wanted to give him a home, a chance at life, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. She flatly denied kidnapping, emphasizing she never harmed Ethan. Investigator Holloway calmly placed a file on the table, opening to the DNA match photo with a red 99.99% stamp. He said, Susan, this is from CODIS. Daniel Cooper doesn't exist. This is Ethan Parker, missing from Hutchinson in 2009. His DNA matches his biological parents perfectly. How do you explain this? Susan fell silent, blinking rapidly, then looked away. After a pause, she repeated her story. I don't know anything about Hutchinson. I just knew he was a relative's child, left to my care. But when investigators laid out the seized documents, fake birth certificate, forged Social Security card, fake vaccination booklet, Susan's face paled slightly. Next, a digital forensics expert presented printouts from her laptop, the scanned birth certificate, Photoshop edit traces, and metadata showing creation in August 2010. An investigator asked, if he's really your nephew, why create a birth certificate and vaccination records? Why use editing software to forge them? A legal guardian wouldn't need to do that. Susan pursed her lips, silent for a long time, then vaguely replied, I just wanted him to go to school. No one accepts applications without papers. The response was quickly countered. You wouldn't need to forge everything if you had legal adoption papers you chose to hide. Why? Over hours, Susan repeatedly altered her story. Initially, she said Daniel's parents died in a car accident, and she was their only kin. When pressed for their names or accident details, she faltered, then shifted to a new story. Daniel was the child of a close friend who passed away. By the third round, she claimed she took Daniel from a couple unable to care for him. Each version contradicted the last, prompting investigators to note, subject exhibits inconsistencies, narrative shifting under pressure. Holloway pressed further, showing video of Susan at church with Daniel, introducing him as her adopted son. You lied to neighbors, the pastor, the school, the community. And now, you're lying to us. Why did you take Ethan Parker? The question rattled Susan. She broke down, sobbing and burying her face in the table. But moments later, she took a breath, wiped her tears, and denied again. I didn't kidnap him. I saved him from a bad situation. By the end of the interrogation, Susan offered no coherent explanation. Every detail she gave collapsed against the evidence. Forged documents proved intentional fraud. Computer files showed a calculated plan from 2010, and undeniable DNA confirmed Daniel was Ethan. The interrogation report stated, suspect denies kidnapping, provides conflicting stories unsupported by data. Physical evidence directly contradicts her claims. As Susan was returned to a holding cell, investigators convened. Holloway asserted, she won't confess easily. But we don't need a confession. We have DNA forged documents, electronic files. This is a solid case. And as he said, the interrogation shifted the case from suspicion to certainty. Susan Whitaker was no longer the adoptive mother in the community's eyes, but someone who deliberately kidnapped and hid Ethan Parker for 7 years. After the contradictory interrogation, the case moved to prosecution. Federal prosecutors and KBI collaborated for months, reviewing every piece of evidence, forensic report, and statement transcript. By early 2024, the puzzle was complete. Absolute DNA match, fake birth certificate, forged medical records, electronic files with edit traces, and Susan Whitaker's inconsistent statements, all formed a chain of evidence strong enough to convince any jury. In February 2024, a Reno County Court judge signed an arrest warrant for Susan on 2 charges, kidnapping and document fraud, to ensure safety and prevent evidence destruction. Wichita's SWAT team was deployed to execute the warrant. At dawn on a cold Tuesday, as the neighborhood lay quiet, armored police vehicles silently parked outside Susan's suburban apartment. At 5:15 a.m., red and blue lights flashed against the old brick walls. The SWAT commander signaled, and agents in bulletproof vests, helmets and rifles fanned out to surround the building. A loudspeaker blared, firm and clear. Susan Whitaker, we have a federal arrest warrant. Open the door and come out with hands empty. No response came from inside. After 10 tense seconds, the breaching team moved in. A loud boom echoed as the wooden door splintered under a metal ram. Dust and smoke filled the air, flashlights sweeping the small living room. Susan jolted awake in her bedroom, barely grasping the situation before guns were trained on her. Get on the ground, hands behind your head, the command rang out. Trembling, she complied, the cold click of handcuffs locking around her wrists. On her nightstand, an unfinished glass of water and a radio playing a faint hymn remained, as if time had frozen. While Susan was escorted out, the forensic team swiftly sealed all assets. Computers, phones, paper documents, and portable drives were placed in sealed evidence bags. Wooden cabinets and a small bedroom safe were opened and checked. Every legally significant item was numbered, photographed, and loaded onto police vehicles. A forensic agent read the inventory aloud on camera. Item 1, birth certificate, forged. Item 2, social security card, forged. Item 3. Dell laptop. Serial number. The entire process was recorded by body cameras to ensure court-admissible evidence, with no detail overlooked. Outside, neighbors peeked out, stunned by the unprecedented scene in their quiet area. Some whispered, "What's going on? Susan's arrested?" To them, she was a model community member. A churchgoer, a nurse, devoted to her son. Seeing her cuffed and led to a police car left many in disbelief. As the police vehicles started, their lights illuminating the narrow street, Susan kept her head down, hair disheveled, face pale. She said nothing. To the enforcement team, this was the end of 7 years of concealment, but the start of a fierce legal battle ahead. For prosecutors, the arrest was a major victory, but they knew all evidence had to be presented airtight in court. Ethan Parker's case, once cold for years, became one of Kansas's most notable kidnapping cases. KBI's official report stated, on X-Kiss 2024, Wichita SWAT executed the arrest warrant for Susan Whitaker at her residence. The suspect was safely detained, all related assets sealed. The operation was fully recorded, adhering to procedural standards. From that morning, Susan Whitaker's name was no longer tied to the image of a kindly nurse, but became the center of a shocking case. For the Parker family, it was the first time in 15 years they felt justice beginning to work to uncover a truth buried too long. After Susan Whitaker's arrest, the FBI and KBI expanded the investigation to a critical direction, reconstructing the events leading to the 2009 disappearance. Physical evidence, DNA, and forged documents were enough to prosecute, but to secure a conviction, prosecutors needed to prove Susan directly kidnapped Ethan Parker on the morning of March 12. Thus, federal investigators tackled a daunting task, piecing together fragmented memories, old witnesses, and neglected data from 15 years prior. First, the FBI reviewed all 2009 case files, Hutchinson police reports, neighbor statements, and questioned suspects. In a forgotten report, they found a note about a possible unknown woman seen multiple times near Carey Park the week before the disappearance. Though no one identified her then, this matched the theory that Susan stalked Ethan for weeks before acting. Investigator Holloway and the task force built a timeline. Late February 2009, Susan took short-term leave from her Wichita clinic. Early March, an ATM camera near Hutchinson High captured her driving a dark green van. This footage, previously dismissed due to poor resolution, was enhanced with 2024 restoration technology, revealing more details. Under dim camera light, a dark green Dodge Caravan was clearly seen moving slowly by the school gate. Though the license plate was blurry, analysts noticed an unusual reflection on the rear plate. Upon enhancement, they confirmed the rear plate was covered with black tape, a detail a witness had mentioned, but wasn't verified at the time. Now the footage and testimony aligned, strong evidence that the suspicious van was Susan's. Old witnesses were re-interviewed. Dorothy, the neighbor who saw Ethan at 7:45 a.m., now over 70, retained clear memories. She said, "I remember a green vehicle moving slowly on that road, but I didn't see who was inside. The odd thing was the license plate looked covered. I thought it was just a broken car then, but now I'm more certain." Her statement was recorded and added to the file, showing Susan prepared by obscuring her plate to avoid identification. Additionally, the FBI tapped 2009 mobile data. Though less precise than today's systems, phone tower logs existed. Checking Susan Whitaker's registered number, technicians found her phone signal near Carey Park on the morning Ethan vanished. From 7:40 to 8 a.m., this was a critical piece. It placed Susan at the scene during Ethan's mysterious 20-minute gap. Previously, this data wasn't thoroughly analyzed due to limited tools, but now, with mobile network reconstruction, they pinpointed her location within a 300-meter radius of Hutchinson High. The details formed a scenario. Susan stalked Ethan for weeks, knowing his departure time and route. On March 12, 2009, she drove her green van from Wichita to Hutchinson, stopping at Carey Park, a low-traffic area. As Ethan passed, she lured or forced him into the vehicle. The license plate was taped to avoid detection, and the fake paper-filled backpack was left by the woods to mislead. Susan then drove to Wichita, where she had a small apartment ready, and began crafting Daniel Cooper for Ethan. Investigators also found receipts for tape and paper purchased in Wichita days before the disappearance, paid with Susan's credit card. Though minor, this fit the larger picture. She didn't act impulsively, but planned meticulously. In their report to prosecutors, the FBI wrote, "The 2009 timeline was reconstructed with high accuracy. Susan Whitaker was near the scene, using a vehicle matching witness testimony, with actions to conceal her license plate, and her phone signal placed her within a 300-meter radius when Ethan vanished. All evidence supports the hypothesis of a deliberate kidnapping, not a coincidence." When presenting these findings to the Parker family, investigators were cautious. Karen choked up hearing the details, whispering, "He was right there on that familiar road, and gone in minutes." Michael gripped his wife's hand, eyes red but resolute. "At least, now we know. The truth is finally out." Reconstructing the 2009 events not only confirmed Susan's role, but answered Hutchinson's haunting question for 15 years, how a teenager vanished in broad daylight unseen. The answer lay in Susan's intricate preparation, stalking, choosing a quiet moment, taping her plate, and planting a decoy backpack. Every detail, however small, contributed to a perfect ruse, only unraveled years later by modern technology and investigators' persistence. In the reconstruction file, the FBI concluded, on the morning of March 12, 2009, Ethan Parker didn't run away. He was kidnapped in a calculated plan, executed by Susan Whitaker. After 7 years under a false identity and 15 years buried in darkness, the truth is finally revealed. After the FBI completed reconstructing the 2009 timeline, the next step was to obtain a direct statement from the person at the center, Ethan Parker, who had lived for 7 years as Daniel Cooper. This was not only a legal requirement, but also the final piece to confirm the entire kidnapping scenario. The interview took place in a quiet room at the FBI's Oklahoma City office. Ethan, now 22, sat across from 2 investigators and a guardian attorney. He looked tense, his eyes betraying unease, but he tried to recount what his fragmented memories allowed. The first question silenced the room. "Ethan, do you remember anything from the morning of March 12, 2009? He swallowed hard, hands gripping a water glass, then whispered, "I remember, a green van. I was passing Carey Park when the door opened. A hand pulled me hard, really fast, and something pressed against my face. I struggled, but within seconds, everything went black." It was the first time in 15 years Ethan recalled the moment of his abduction. The investigators scribbled quickly, his words confirming the hypothesis they'd built. Ethan continued, "When I woke up, I was in a strange room with thick curtains blocking everything. That woman, Susan, told me my name wasn't Ethan anymore, it was Daniel. She said I had to remember, from now on, you're Daniel, and I'm your mother. If anyone asks, that's what you say." From that day, the name Ethan vanished from daily life, replaced by an imposed identity. Ethan said he was taken to Oklahoma just days after the disappearance. Living in a small apartment, rarely going out except for school or church with Susan. "I wasn't allowed to make phone calls, use the internet at home, or have close friends. Whenever I asked about my past, she said, my parents died in an accident and all my papers were lost. She told me to be grateful for being raised." Ethan bowed his head, voice choking. "I was too young to question it then. I believed her, believed I was really Daniel Cooper." An investigator asked, "Did you ever see yourself on missing children posters?" Ethan shook his head. "No, she never let me watch news on TV or read newspapers. At school, when friends talked about their families, I just said briefly that my foster mom raised me from a young age. No one questioned much." For 7 years, Ethan was kept in a tightly controlled bubble, enough to function in society, but lacking the pieces to uncover the truth. When discussing life under the false identity, Ethan admitted feeling suffocatingly confined. "Every time I asked about papers," she snapped, told me never to bring it up. When friends got driver's licenses, I wanted one too, but she said I didn't need it. I didn't understand why, just felt my life was different and always secretive. The most critical part of his statement was his assertion, I never knew I was a missing person. I didn't know there were parents out there looking for me. To me, there was only one truth. I was Daniel Cooper, living with a strange foster mom. This silenced the room, both painful and validating. Ethan had grown up in a world of lies, to the point he never questioned his own identity. At the end of the interview, Ethan looked directly at the investigators. Now I know I'm Ethan Parker, and I understand those years were a lie. But I can't deny, part of me still sees her as a mother. I'm torn, but I want the truth to come out. The statement was recorded. Every detail aligning with the FBI's timeline, the green van-covered license plate, immediate move to Oklahoma, and creation of a false identity. This was the final piece turning suspicion into legal reality. Susan Whitaker was not only accused by physical evidence, but confirmed by the victim's own account of the kidnapping. After Ethan Parker's statement was recorded and strengthened the investigation, the next phase began preparing the indictment against Susan Whitaker. At the Reno County Prosecutor's Office, a dedicated team of state prosecutors and federal Justice Department representatives gathered around a table covered with files. On it were thick stacks, DNA results, forged documents, search warrant reports, cell phone data, witness testimonies, and crucially, Ethan's direct account. Every piece was in place for a comprehensive prosecution. Lead prosecutor Linda Carver outlined the charges. First, kidnapping a minor, under federal law, carrying 20 to 25 years in prison, depending on aggravating factors. Second, document fraud, forging federal documents, including the birth certificate, social security card, and medical records, with a maximum penalty of 10 years. Third, obstruction of justice for maintaining a false narrative for years, hiding Ethan from authorities. Carver emphasized, we will pursue all three charges, as each has sufficient independent evidence. Combined, the penalties will be at the maximum. During the meeting, some younger prosecutors raised a concern. Could the jury be swayed by Susan's foster mother image? Carver acknowledged the challenge. We're not just facing evidence, but emotions. Susan cared for Ethan, albeit wrongly. Her defense will exploit this. As predicted, Susan's court-appointed legal team prepared a defense. Lead attorney Mark Ellison argued Susan wasn't a cold criminal, but a woman who suffered a devastating personal loss. Medical records from 2008 showed Susan had a late-term miscarriage, followed by a mental health crisis hospitalization. Ellison claimed this drove her kidnapping. My client acted in a state of mental disturbance, driven by the pain of losing a child, not calculated criminal intent. Prosecutors countered forcefully. They presented laptop data showing Susan's meticulous planning, edited birth certificate files, print shop receipts, and forged vaccination records. This wasn't an impulsive act in a breakdown. This was a systematic plan, sustained for years with sophisticated concealment, Carver said in an internal press briefing. The sentencing framework was discussed thoroughly. If convicted of kidnapping, Susan faced a minimum of 20 years, potentially 25, due to the severity. The victim was held for 7 years under a false identity, denied contact with family. Document fraud added 5-10 years, and obstruction of justice another 5. Combined, Susan could face nearly 40 years, meaning she'd be elderly upon release. Outside the meeting, media coverage intensified. Major Kansas newspapers ran headlines. Kidnap case from 2009, prosecutors prepare charges. Public opinion split. Some were outraged, demanding Susan pay heavily for stealing Ethan's childhood. Others expressed sympathy, calling her a woman lost in grief. Carver knew to win. They had to tell a story, not just of law, but of the Parker family's emotional truth. During this time, Michael and Karen Parker met with prosecutors to prepare for trial. Karen cried hearing the sentencing framework, saying, I don't need her in prison for life. I just need justice to acknowledge Ethan was stolen from us. Michael, quieter, nodded. But without a strong penalty, other kids could face what my son did. The final indictment was completed by late March 2024. Over 600 pages, it covered evidence from 2009 to 2016 and the 2024 arrest. The cover read in bold, United States versus Susan Whitaker. This indictment not only launched a lengthy trial, but marked the end of 15 years of silence in the Ethan Parker case. In June 2024, Susan Whitaker's trial began at the Reno County Federal Courthouse. The room was packed with media and Hutchinson residents who had followed the case for 15 years. The Parker family sat in the front row behind the prosecutors. Ethan, now an adult, was under special protection and appeared only when needed. On the second day, Kansas prosecutors presented technical evidence, the cornerstone to convince the jury this wasn't just a touching story, but a systematic crime with undeniable physical proof. First, prosecutor Linda Carver displayed on a large screen the collection of forged documents seized from Susan's home, the Daniel Cooper birth certificate, fake Social Security card, and handwritten vaccination booklet. Each was enlarged, showing the faint stamped seal, sloppy handwriting, and missing mandatory serial numbers. This isn't a mistake, Carver stressed. This is a forged product created to hide Ethan Parker's true identity. The jury watched closely, some shaking their heads, clearly swayed by the stark contrast between legitimate and fake documents. Next, an FBI forensic printing expert took the stand. He presented findings. The birth certificate paper was mass-produced in 2010, impossible to exist in 1994 as claimed. The laser ink matched retail ink sold from 2008-2011, distinct from Kansas's proprietary ink. Scientifically, we can confirm this birth certificate was created at least a year after Ethan's disappearance, not an original document. Then, prosecutors presented the DNA evidence, the case's bedrock. On screen, results showed Ethan's taken as Daniel Cooper, DNA matched Michael and Karen Parker's at 99.99%. A genetic chart enlarged identical gene segments. A CODIS geneticist explained to the jury, the probability of a non-biological match with this level of alignment is virtually zero. This is absolute proof Daniel Cooper is Ethan Parker. As the expert finished, the courtroom fell silent. Michael Parker bowed his head, tears streaming, while Karen gripped Emily's hand. Next, prosecutors called an FBI digital expert. On screen, they showed files extracted from Susan's laptop, scanned Daniel Cooper birth certificates, metadata showing creation in August 2010, and a vaccination Form 2 file with edit traces. This data shows the defendant actively forged documents using Photoshop. Electronic traces can't be fully erased, and we recovered the full edit history. A juror nodded to another, the digital evidence carrying special weight. Additionally, prosecutors played restored ATM camera footage from near Hutchinson High. It clearly showed a dark green Dodge Caravan, its license plate covered with black tape. Direct witness Dorothy, Ethan's neighbor, took the stand. Despite her age, she spoke clearly. I saw that vehicle moving slowly. Very odd. When Ethan went missing, I thought of it immediately. The plate was covered. I remember because the light reflected strangely. The match between video and testimony made the evidence more compelling. Prosecutor Carver tied it all into a logical chain. Susan Whitaker was at the scene on March 12, 2009 per cell phone data. She used a green van with a covered plate to kidnap Ethan. She then created the Daniel Cooper identity with forged documents. Proven by physical and digital evidence, and DNA confirmed Daniel was Ethan. Each piece stands alone, Carver said, but together, they form an undeniable picture. The defendant kidnapped and hid Ethan Parker for 7 years. The defense tried to counter, arguing Susan acted in mental distress post-miscarriage, with no direct footage of her pulling Ethan into the van. Prosecutors rebutted, "We don't need that video, as science witnesses and technical data speak for us. This wasn't an impulse but a detailed plan sustained for years." As the day's session ended, public reaction exploded. Kansas media reported, prosecutors present ironclad evidence, DNA, fake documents, van footage. For the jury, the technical evidence built an undeniable truth. For the Parker family, it was the moment they saw justice finally tilting in their favor. After 15 years, the truth was revealed through science and evidence. On the fifth day of the trial, the Reno County courtroom fell silent when prosecutors announced the next witness, Ethan Parker himself. From the waiting area, Ethan took the stand, visibly tense, his green eyes scanning the room pensively. At 22, he was grown, but his shyness showed under dozens of watching eyes. The prosecutor asked first, "Can you confirm your real name?" Ethan took a deep breath and said, "My name is Ethan Parker. I'm not Daniel Cooper. I'm the kid who went missing in Hutchinson, Kansas, in 2009. The statement sparked murmurs. Some residents cried. Karen Parker in the front row buried her face in her husband's shoulder, tears falling, while Michael gripped her hand, eyes fixed on his son. The prosecutor let Ethan recount his painful memory. He slowly described being pulled into the green van, the smell of plastic seats, and a hand gripping his shoulder, choking him. He said Susan changed his name to Daniel, moved to Oklahoma days later, and for 7 years, he was barred from contacting anyone beyond school or church. I didn't know I was missing. I thought she was my mom, and I was Daniel Cooper, Ethan said, voice trembling. The victim's direct testimony became living proof, convincing the jury that Susan's explanations were lies. Next, prosecutors called Hutchinson witnesses, Ethan's old classmates. One recalled, "That day, March 12, 2009, we were in class waiting for Ethan. Roll call was at 8:15, and he wasn't there. At first, we thought he was sick or skipped. By noon, word spread, Ethan was missing. The class was stunned. He never skipped without notice." Another classmate, now grown, added, "I remember that day clearly. The school was in chaos. After that, we never saw Ethan again, like he vanished from the world." These accounts brought the jury back to the initial moment, highlighting how absurd it was that Ethan ran away. The next witness was an Oklahoma teacher who taught Ethan as Daniel. Holding her glasses, she spoke firmly. From the start, his file felt off. The birth certificate looked strange. The seal faint, the handwriting unlike official documents. When I asked Susan, she snapped, saying the papers were lost and redone. As a teacher, I couldn't verify, but I always suspected. She noted Daniel Ethan was quiet, avoiding activities needing official papers. I suggested he join the soccer team, but Susan cited no insurance. Now I understand why. Prosecutor Linda Carver linked the three testimonies. The victim confirmed he was Ethan. Classmates verified the disappearance day, and the Oklahoma teacher flagged document irregularities. We have scientific evidence, digital evidence, and now living evidence from those who were there. All point to one conclusion. Susan Whitaker kidnapped Ethan Parker and created the false Daniel Cooper identity to hide her crime. The defense tried to pivot, asking Ethan if he ever felt cared for by Susan. Ethan admitted, "She fed me, got me to school, but that doesn't change the truth. She stole me from my real family. She kept me from knowing my parents were looking for me, and that's what hurts most." His response silenced the room. No one could deny the victim's truth. As the day ended, the jury left with somber faces. The witness testimonies built a powerful emotional foundation, complementing the solid technical evidence. The Parker family hugged Ethan tightly in the courthouse hallway, silent but understanding. Justice was closer than ever. On the final trial day, the Reno County courtroom was thick with tension. The 12 jurors sat solemnly, eyes fixed on the judge as he asked for their verdict. The room held its breath. The jury foreman stood, voice clear. "We, the jury, after considering all evidence, find the defendant Susan Whitaker guilty on all charges, kidnapping, document fraud, and obstruction of justice." The words rang like a hammer, sealing a 15-year dark chapter. A brief murmur rose, then fell into silence. Karen Parker buried her head in her husband's shoulder, sobbing. Michael gripped her hand, eyes red but relieved. Ethan sat behind, face taut, as if still processing the truth being legally acknowledged. The judge proceeded with sentencing. He listed each charge, emphasizing the severity of stealing a child's youth and noting Susan's sophisticated document fraud over years. The defendant's actions not only destroyed a family, but damaged the community's trust, he said, voice low and firm. After reviewing the sentencing framework, he declared, Defendant Susan Whitaker is sentenced to 22 years in a federal correctional facility, with no parole eligibility for the first 18 years. As the sentence was read, Susan sat motionless, eyes vacant. She didn't cry or argue. When two officers approached to cuff her, she stood, walking slowly without resistance. Her hands locked behind her, her small frame dwarfed by dark blue uniforms. Before being led out, she glanced briefly at Ethan. In that fleeting moment, no one could tell if her look held regret, pain, or a warped attachment to her mother role. Ethan avoided her gaze, head bowed, tears falling onto the cold wooden table. The verdict closed a case that haunted Hutchinson for over a decade. Media blared headlines. 15 years later, Ethan Parker case closes, Susan Whitaker, sentenced to 22 years. The community sighed in relief, but also ached. Faded posters once on utility poles were now just memories, but the story of a teenager stolen in broad daylight became a scar that wouldn't fade. For the Parker family, the ruling was a belated acknowledgement of their long pain. Karen shared in a brief post-trial interview, "I can't reclaim 15 years, but today I know justice stood with us." Michael said simply, "Finally, Ethan is back with his real name." Ethan, in a rare media appearance, whispered, "I want to live as Ethan Parker. Today's verdict lets me start again." Susan was escorted post-trial to a federal women's prison. All her assets were sealed for restitution and legal fees. The case file was officially closed, marking the end of a journey from disappearance, despair, to reunion and justice. In the courthouse hallway, afternoon light streamed through a glass window, illuminating the Parker family's faces. They stood together, silent. But in that silence was liberation after 15 years of burden. The case closed, but its echoes would linger in Hutchinson's memory. A reminder that even in a small town, crime can strike in daylight, and only justice's persistence can reveal the truth. After Susan Whitaker was convicted and sent to federal prison, the Ethan Parker case was officially closed from a legal standpoint. But its repercussions continued to ripple across Kansas. Just weeks after the trial, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, KBI, released a comprehensive 400-page report detailing the entire journey from March 12, 2009, to the sentencing in February 2024. The report highlighted three key factors in solving the case: the CODIS DNA system, federal-state coordination, and above all, the relentless persistence of investigators across generations. At a public press conference, veteran investigator James Holloway stated, "It took us 15 years, but the truth finally spoke. Justice may come slowly, but it will come." The quote quickly became a standout in local newspapers. KBI also praised the role of technology in reconstructing the 2009 timeline, restored ATM camera footage, and reanalyzed old cell phone data using new techniques, proved that scientific advancements could revive cases thought forever cold. The success of storing the Parker family's DNA in CODIS since 2010 was cited as a prime example of the federal database's importance. Without that link, Daniel Cooper might have lived his entire life under a false identity, undetected. In Kansas police academies, the Ethan Parker case was immediately incorporated into training as a mandatory case study. Recruits learned to analyze timelines, handle witnesses, leverage technological data, and never overlook small details, from the paper-filled backpack to the tape-covered license plate. The emphasized lesson: no detail is meaningless. What's ignored today could be the deciding piece tomorrow. From a community perspective, the case left lessons about vigilance and the power of unity. In the months following the trial, Hutchinson community meetings often cited Ethan as a symbol of faith and justice. The local church held prayer services, not only for the Parker family, but for others still searching for missing children. On the wall of the Hutchinson Police Department's meeting room, a wooden plaque was hung, engraved with Ethan Parker, 2009-2024, cold case solved. For the Parker family, life couldn't return to what it was, but they began rebuilding. Ethan slowly adjusted to living under his true name, learning to reintegrate after years of isolation. Karen joined organizations supporting parents of missing children, sharing her experience and belief that you never give up. Michael returned to work, but often spoke at community forums, advocating for more investment in investigative technology. Emily, now a college student, said in an interview, "My brother is proof that hope can be fragile, but it never dies." In its concluding report, KBI wrote, "The Ethan Parker case proves that the persistence of law enforcement and victims' families can overcome time. CODIS, when used correctly, is an indispensable tool in solving cold cases. The greatest lesson: justice may be delayed, but it is never denied." The story of Ethan Parker, the 15-year-old who vanished in 2009 from Hutchinson, Kansas, only to be found 7 years later, living as Daniel Cooper, reflects a stark reality in American society today. The constant fear for children's safety, the complexity of kidnapping crimes, and the critical role of technology in pursuing justice. Ethan was pulled into a green van in broad daylight on his familiar route to school. A detail that forces us to ask, could communities be more vigilant, ensuring a meticulously planned act, like taping a license plate, isn't overlooked for years? Susan Whitaker's creation of a fake birth certificate, forged vaccination records, and discreet cash-based lifestyle show how sophisticated criminals can be without federal coordination and data-matching technology. The lesson for American society is to never dismiss any detail, from a neighbor's report of a strange vehicle to irregularities in school records. The Parker family's decision to submit DNA to CODIS in 2010 is clear evidence of forensic science's importance. It was what revealed the truth 7 years later. In reality, citizens should understand the value of cooperating with authorities, not just when a case is active, but even when it has gone cold. The story also reminds us that justice can be slow, but it can arrive with persistence. For American parents, the key message is to stay vigilant, build community bonds, and trust the legal system, because that persistence brought Ethan back after 15 years and could save other children today. If you find this story valuable and thought-provoking, please subscribe to join us in exploring more cold case stories in the U.S. Thank you for following, and we'll see you in the next video with another story full of mysteries yet to unravel.